Welcome, everyone, to the Independent Consulting 101 course. In this course, you're going to be hearing a lot from me. My name is Daniel Lay, and with me, I have Ellen McInerney.
Hello, everyone.
Before we get started, there is a disclaimer. So, Ellen and I are going to be talking a lot about our stories and our journey from working full time to becoming an independent consultant. And these are really our experience and our lessons learned that we want to share with you. Everything that we talk about and this document that comes with this course does not serve as legal or accounting advice. So the information provided is based on our personal experiences. We recommend consulting an attorney, an accountant that is familiar with the laws and regulations in your state or multiple states, depending on where you are with your business and how your business is organized and where you conduct business. So there you go. There's a disclaimer, and we'll go from there. We've broken up this course into three different sections. The first one is what you need to plan for before you take the leap from full-time employee to an independent consultant. We're going to talk about what you need to consider, different things that you should do in the planning of making that leap. And then we're going to set some expectations on different types of costs and expenses that you'll experience. From there, we'll move to setup, and that's going to be talking about all the different things, from all the administrative things that you need to build up, as well as all the things that you need to set up to be able to operate as a business. And then from there, we'll move to operate. So section 3 is all about what you need to do on top of delivering on projects, but all the different things that you need to do to sell, to budget, as well as invoice the client to get paid. All right, so let's just move into the next section. So I'm going to hand this over to Ellen and just talk about what you need to think through as you begin the planning stage.
So one of the first parts of the planning process is just developing marketable skills and then updating your professional experience. I think as consultants, we move from project to project quite quickly. And if you don't document the work that you've done, it's hard to look back and have an inventory as you start to prepare for new sales opportunities. So one of the first things we suggest doing is creating a consulting resume. What this entails is, listing all prior projects and any important details such as who was the client you worked with, what was your role, what was your team size, what was the scope of work, what were the deliverables, and then most importantly, what were the results and lessons learned. I oftentimes find as I look back at projects, when I don't do this in a timely manner, it's hard to remember what was the problem statement, what did you deliver, and what did you accomplish. So I think doing this after each project is a great way to stay up to date as you transition into the sales process.
Definitely, I would echo that for sure, and that's something that I haven't done in the past, and now I'm finding myself in a point where I need to apply for new positions, and I need to spend the time and the hours of work to put that consulting resume together. One thing I'd add is also when you're building that consulting resume, keep it very concise and maybe just 3 bullets about that specific project. Because when you're applying online as well, there's usually a section where you can put in the projects that you've worked on that's relevant to the new role that you're applying for. And the shorter and the more concise and focused it is, the more that recruiters will read it and understand quickly.
Absolutely. A bullet on what was a problem, a bullet on what you delivered, and a bullet on the results. I feel like is a good way to
Perfect.
structure that.
Yep, that's it.
Yeah, and it's also, best practices, keeping your resume updated, but oftentimes in consulting we use something that we call like a one-page biography. And so your consulting resume can feed into that, but that's a good thing to have updated at all times as well. So it kind of gives people a quick executive summary on who you are, how many years of experience do you have, what does your industry experience look like, what does your project experience look like in terms of, have you done system integrations, have you done business process redesign. Keeping that updated and ready to send off on a moment's notice will be really helpful, whether you're doing a direct contracting relationship or a subcontracting relationship. It's important to have something teed up if you're asked for it.
Oh yeah, for sure. I would say that's one of the first things that in a subcontract relationship, and I know we're going to talk about that in a second. Companies are going to ask for that right away, so that they can send your one-page biography to any of the decision makers to know, okay, this is the person that we're going to be hiring on, and these are the skill sets that apply directly to why we're hiring them. And having that ready will just save you a lot of stress and a lot of time in the future when you can actually put the time into it now and build up a good, one pager biography so that you're not scrambling to put it together later when you're either on project or busy and, trying to get sales activities done at the same time. So definitely recommend getting that done, sooner than later.
Absolutely. And, consider modifying it for the type of work that you'll be doing, because I think that there's certain projects you may want to highlight over others depending on what the sales pitch is for. But having something as a starting point and having an inventory of, perhaps you have a system integration bio, a business process redesign bio, having a couple versions will be helpful for you to quickly turn it around. And then another thing too that I would highly suggest doing is just creating case studies after every project. Those are really helpful as part of the sales process, but they also really highlight the results that were delivered. So, getting in the habit of completing a project, updating your resume, updating your bio, updating your case studies will be really helpful as you look back and need to leverage prior experience.
Yep. And we'll add examples of this in the course or in the lesson attachments. So we'll have our version of a biography. We'll also include a couple sample case studies so you guys can see basically what that would look like and what you can use and leverage for your own assets.
And we hope that as you go through this process, you ask yourself some of the challenging questions of, truly, am I ready to make this transition? We've included some questions here just around project management, client relationship management, and project financials. But speaking from experience, I was thinking about making this transition when I was a senior consultant or individual contributor. And I decided to wait a couple more years to get some management experience under my belt. And I think that was one of the best decisions I've made. What I've learned as being an independent consultant is you need to be able to do all the project management skills, but you also have to manage the client. You need to understand financials, both from a pricing standpoint, managing budget, and also invoicing. And so, if you haven't had exposure to developing those skills and managing those things, I think that it's going to make the transition a lot more challenging, especially if you're doing a direct contracting relationship. So, having an honest conversation about what are the gaps in my skill set and what should I spend more time developing before I make this transition, I think will really set you up to be successful.
Yeah, and I know Ellen, you and I both were at the manager level on a larger consulting firm before we took the leap and to go independent. So, not saying that that's the path you have to take, but I would highly recommend thinking about exactly what Ellen just talked about. And do you really have the skills and the experience to go independent, and not just doing it because you think it would be something fun to do?
And if you have system or application experience, I almost think of that as more of a principal or different type of track. So if your plan is to be an individual contributor and really hone in on a certain application and or coding or something of that nature, the path might look different for you. But for both Daniel and I, we took more of the manager level path where it's around the program management, around the client relationship management. So that's another component to consider as you look back and assess your skills. So then the next part of the planning process is evaluating your network. One of the things that I've learned from independent consulting is that the strength of your network is critical. And so we'll have Daniel talk a little bit about the different relationships, but I think before you even make the transition, it's important to make sure you have an inventory of all your prior clients and understand their current roles, as people often get promoted, prior colleagues that you've worked with, and then also list any potential consulting partners. So, do you know other independent consultants? Are there consulting companies you could potentially partner with, or staff augmentation firms, as well as software vendors? I think by doing that and evaluating the level of influence of the people in your network, whether they have a budget, whether they're decision makers, will give you a better sense of the strength of your network. And as you make this transition, the reality of it is that the strength of your network may really make or break you as a consultant, especially if you do a direct contact contracting relationship. And so, Daniel, I know you've had experience in both type of contracting relationships. Do you want to speak to that?
Sure. So looking at the right-hand side of the screen, we've outlined two of them. And I'll start with direct. So direct consulting is when you have a contractual relationship between your company and the client, and there's no one in between. When I first started out, this is the relationship that I had with the clients. And one of the pros, obviously, is the higher margins. So if there's no intermediary between you and the client, obviously you can charge the full market price for your services. So that's definitely one of the biggest pros. The next is really the ability to expand. So when you are going into this type of contractual relationship, this sets you up to be able to grow your company, hire more consultants, and to really grow your business. Now, moving to the cons, this is if it's something that you want to do to grow, it definitely comes with some trade offs. So when you have a direct contract with the client, you are accountable for everything. So anything that happens on the client side that occurred from either you or one of your employees or one of your consultants that's contracting through you, you're accountable and you're responsible. Everything from sales is your responsibility as well. So you have to essentially be the salesman, the HR representative, the person that's delivering on projects. You just have a ton more responsibilities. You need to take all that on yourself. So I would say that if you have ambitions to grow a full consulting firm, this is definitely a goal you should have. But if not, the best option is to actually go through the next option, which is subcontracting. But before I talk about that, again, this is about evaluating your network. So think about in your own network, do you have relationships with people that are at the executive leadership level that know about your company and what you're trying to accomplish? Because I would say getting a direct contracting relationship is one of the hardest relationships to establish. To bring in a new consulting firm in a company, it takes a lot of political capital. So for someone to bring you in, they have to not only know you, trust you, but believe in what you're trying to build, and that there is a massive benefit to them and their company to take you on. I know for me to get a direct relationship, it took about 2 to 3 years to get to that point where people in the C suite knew me by name, and all the executives underneath them were big advocates of not only me, but the services that I could bring to the table. So if that is not something that you're thinking about right now, or you're just dipping your toes into independent consulting, subcontracting is by far, the way to go. I would say it's not only the most viable option for you, but it's the easiest, and also the way that takes on the least amount of risk. So subcontracting is when you have a direct relationship with a larger consulting firm, and they handle the direct contractual relationship with the client. So everything from your invoicing, getting paid, all the contracts, as well as all of the administrative support that you'll need is handled by that larger consulting firm. What they'll do is likely set up some kind of business agreement with you and some kind of invoice and payment arrangement with you, and everything else that it takes to manage the client is handled by the consulting company. So you can see, obviously, right off the bat, the pros are, all the administrative support is taken care of. You don't have the accountability as you do in a direct relationship, because the consulting company is handling that and managing that relationship with the client. And one of the biggest pros of this is they have a sales pipeline, and they likely have relationships with a lot of clients. So they will likely have different options. So when it comes to the point where you're finish your project, they will likely come to you with more opportunities. And that's something that's really nice to have, so that you can focus on your client delivery work when you're on project, and not have to worry and stress about what happens when my project ends in June, and lining something up for July or August. The cons of this relationship obviously is lower margins. When you have someone that is acting in between you and the client, obviously they need to get paid for that. And they will take something on top of your hourly rate, to make sure that their margins can cover the cost of doing business and for them to make money as well. From my experience, moving from a direct to a subcontracting relationship, my rate decreased from 10 to 20%. And that is, I think, a very optimistic look at how your margins will decrease. Because I personally had a relationship with a consulting company I was subcontracting under, and they understood my skills and what I brought to the table. So my rate was still very competitive in the market. And the last thing, obviously, on the con side is autonomy. You don't necessarily have the reins to do everything you want with the client, and they'll have non-compete clauses and some rules of engagement with the client that you'll have to work with. Okay, so I think that was a lot on the different types of contractual relationships. What we also wanted to talk about, and moving to the next slide, is the informational interviews. In the planning section, obviously, what you want to do is be able to get as much information as possible to make sure you're making the right decision. And one great way to do that is to talk to other people that have done it. In my personal experience, I didn't do this as much as Ellen did. She is very thorough, where I didn't reach out to as many people as I probably should have, and I could have avoided a lot of issues. And I definitely have more lessons learned because of it. But Ellen, I know you didn't do what I did. You actually went in and interviewed a lot of people. So why don't you talk about your experience and how that was beneficial for you?
Yeah, I think this is definitely, I took a long time to make the decision in the transition. And so, both formally and informally, I was interviewing people all the time. So, when I was working at a consulting firm, I had worked with people who had previously been independent consultants. So, had some really honest conversations with them because they had transitioned from the consulting firm to independent and then back to a consulting firm. So, I was able to ask them about the pros and cons of each. And people at different phases of their lives make different decisions about the level of risk they want to take on, or the need for insurance and those sort of things that aren't self-funded. So I think it was helpful to have those conversations both informally with colleagues that I have, as well as like formal. I don't know if I would consider an interview, but just hopping on the phone and asking questions about people who've gone through the process. And I think it's a great way to highlight some of the things to look out for. So things I heard about were, making sure you have a good accountant right away, making sure you have a good lawyer, making sure you invoice the client in order to get paid. It was just interesting to hear about how everyone approached their own planning process and what you learned from their journey. And then from that, I was able to make notes on things that I want to either ensure that I'm doing or avoid, and learning from other people's mistakes. So I think this is a really valuable step in the process. And the more people that you can engage with and just kind of let them know that you're thinking about making the transition, I think the more people may consider you if they hear about a need for independent consultants.
Mhm. And Ellen, how many people did you talk to in that planning phase?
I would say it ended up being close to 10.
Wow. Okay. And were the ranges of the people that you talked to like very experienced or fresh independent consultants, or did it range?
I would say most people at least had a year of experience. Some of them were
Mhm.
people who had transitioned back into a full time role from independent consulting. And so got to learn why they made that decision and, some of the drivers of that. But I'd say it ended up being about 10 people.
Wow, that's very thorough.
And it certainly was, it was over a period of time. I took a lot of time to make this decision. So, a lot of
Mhm.
it was coworkers that had gone through the independent consulting thing, and other ones were the people I started to reach out to more diligently.
So I'm going to jump to the next slide. So estimated costs. This is very important. Something that I didn't necessarily know all the details of when I first started, but what we want to do was show you essentially what it costs in the first year, so that you can understand what kind of capital you're looking at. So looking at this diagram on the right, this is essentially my costs for the first year. And I'll walk through this and we'll start at the operations and go counterclockwise. And, Ellen, definitely jump in on your thoughts on these types of expenses. So starting with operations, so that's that dark purple, and that accounts for about 14% of your first year costs. Number one is equipment. So you have to be able to go onto a client site and have everything you need to do the job. Most of the time, that's a cell phone, that's a computer or a laptop, potentially headphones, so that you can take calls when you're on a client site. Webinar software, this is less something that you may need. The client may provide that for you if it's WebEx. I personally got GoToMeeting. That's also something it's potentially optional because sometimes the client doesn't allow you to use your own webinar software. They want theirs, which is locked down and compliant to their security. So again, that's something that you may or may not need. Email, Cloud Drive, that came combined for me. I went with Microsoft 360, I think is what it's called. I do not recommend using like a random Gmail account. It's good to have a professional account set up, and to do that, it'll probably be around $200 a year. And the last one, which is very, very important, is business insurance. So that's something that a lot of clients and a lot of subcontractors will require of you. So definitely look into that. Definitely talk to your lawyer and potentially your accountant about what the options are, but that's something that you really need. Any thoughts, Ellen, on operations?
Yeah, I think for equipment, it really depends on how robust you want to be and the certain conveniences you get used to. So, if you're coming from a large company and you're someone who likes to print, you may need to have a printer or certain adapters depending on the client site. So, I think it really depends on how you want to operate. But one of the bigger upfront costs, and then as part of the training, we get into business insurance as well. So, we provide a little bit more detail on how to evaluate it and at what point in time you would want to purchase it.
Perfect. Moving to sales and marketing. So this is only 2%. Essentially, I started with a website, but it's not necessary. It again depends on what your goals and ambitions are for your consulting company. If you want to expand and grow, a website is definitely something you should consider. The next is a LinkedIn premium account. LinkedIn's obviously free. There's some benefits for premium from a sales perspective of reaching out to people, sending some messages. But again, these I would say are not necessary costs, but something that I invested in when I first started out. Moving to legal, this is about 16%. And the legal fees will differ depending on where, what type of services you're looking for and and what you really want out of your lawyer. Again, because I didn't talk to a lot of people, I thought I could do this on my own, and I went LegalZoom, which, if you understand everything very well, LegalZoom may actually be a good option. What I ended up doing at the end, though, was I hired a lawyer to review everything that I put together just to make sure that it was right. You can start with a lawyer, and I think it would save you a lot of time, energy, and potentially avoid a few issues. From there, incorporation fees, $500, and we're going to be talking about that in the setup section a little more. And then foreign qualification and state fees. And again, this is what your lawyer and accountant should inform you about. But working in the U.S. and different states, you have to apply to work in those states. It's a very strange setup. Definitely, again, your lawyer and your accountant should get into this stuff, but we want to at least show you what I paid for in these different categories when I first started.
Yeah, and I think you'll find during your first year of the setup process, that's when you really want to rely heavily on both lawyers and accountants. But I think once you get a couple of years under your belt and you understand the contracts that are needed and have a good template for it, then you can consider other options such as LegalZoom. But certainly is best practice to have someone review every contract that you sign.
Absolutely. It's better to be safe than sorry. Moving on, finance, accounting fees, again, that will vary depending on what you're looking for and what you're doing. I went with QuickBooks as well in my first year. So this is just essentially a bookkeeping accounting software that you can use. You can link it up to your credit cards and your business accounts, and it does a lot of automated functions for you. So you're not constantly going into, for example, a spreadsheet and updating your books that way. So that's an option to consider. Again, I would talk to your accountant and figure out what services you want from them, what they can do, and then decide if you want to use something like QuickBooks or not. And Ellen, does your accountant do your bookkeeping, or do you use QuickBooks or something
I'm
like that?
actually using a spreadsheet right now, but my accountant does require a payroll system. And so that's something that we use on a monthly basis to create checks. I think my accountant probably would like me to transition to QuickBooks. So that's probably something I'll look at for this year. But given the limited number of transactions, I was able to do it just through Excel.
No, and I agree with that. When you're a one person operation and you're just getting started, a lot of this is pretty straightforward. I have a finance background, so it's something that I was comfortable with. But again, talk to your accountant and figure that out. So this last part, which is so HR in this donut, it's 57%. The biggest expense obviously is medical insurance. I'm in a unique scenario, or not unique, but a scenario where my wife's insurance, I'm on that. So I don't necessarily need to pay for that out of my pocket, which reduces the cost significantly. I know, Ellen, you're actually paying for medical insurance. I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, and this is something so that's close to what I'm paying for the year. There's a couple different options. You can get it on the state exchange, or if you're leaving a larger organization, sometimes you can buy insurance through Cobra, which is actually what I ended up doing. And so, certainly something worth looking into. But there is a time limit on that. So I think for Cobra, it can be anywhere from a year to a year and a half, but definitely one of the larger expenditures as it relates to annual expenses, but certainly a lot of options out there.
So there you go. That's just essentially a summary of the first year costs altogether. Again, they don't all hit at the same time. Some you're paying monthly, some you're paying upfront. But as you're thinking and planning about becoming an independent consultant, definitely consider these expenses. And if it's something that you're comfortable with, just to set some expectations so you know what you're getting into from a financial standpoint.
And one thing we'll get into later in the training is just around, in addition to personal expenses and business expenses, you also have to have the cash on hand if you're going to be doing any reimbursable travel to client sites. So making sure you're factoring that into your estimate as well.
That's perfect. And it's a perfect segue to our next section, but that will be in the next lesson. So definitely check back in when that's available. You'll just get to hear more from Ellen and I on the next section or the next phase of your independent consulting journey. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks for joining us.